Thank you. So, building partnerships, not projects. So, as Rodolfo just said, my name is Sean Blakeley. I'm a product owner and producer at a UK-based agency, Pragmatic. I work largely on Scrum-based enterprise projects. And previous to that, I was a senior WordPress developer, and I've been working with the web and with WordPress for a very, very long time.
I'm Beatrice Whelan. I am Global Digital Content Manager for social media events and blogging at Sage. I'm the project lead on Sage Advice, which we'll be talking about today. And for anybody who's not familiar with Sage, we are a business solutions provider. And before I joined Sage, I worked for 6 years as a front-end WordPress developer.
Perfect. So, who's this talk aimed at? Well, as Rodolfo sort of suggested, we're talking really to clients and to agencies, specifically today. And we're going to talk about the principles of building successful partnerships. So we're going to look at sort of, a number of those key principles, and then the sort of overarching, so the sort of the single key principles. Then we're going to talk about how we've applied some of those principles into our relationship with Sage, and then look at why we should look at trying to build successful partnerships. So why, sort of put in that extra energy, that extra effort to try and build partnerships. So building a successful partnership, well, unfortunately there's no secret sauce, there's no quick way of doing it. So as a client for you, what are the key things for a successful partnership?
Well, when I think about what's really important to us when we're working with a partner on a project like this, honesty is really important. We don't want to be kept in the dark. We prefer to know the information, whether it's good or bad. So honesty is super important. Also, proactively solving problems. We need to feel that we can rely on the partner to help us solve problems as they arise, as they often do in many projects. Also, keeping momentum, keeping the project moving forward is really important, so that ultimately we can make sure that we're hitting deadlines. We need to have the confidence to know that the partner we're working in will hit the deadlines that we've agreed.
Absolutely. I think for us as the agency partner, one of the key things is around transparency. So that's transparency on both sides. Both for us as the agency, more around sort of issues potentially with the code base, and for the client, transparency around sort of change of personnel or funding streams and so on. Building a rapport with the client is really important. So building up an understanding with our clients, and also defining or really sort of understanding their definition of success. So what success means to our clients, so we can understand the direction of travel, where we're sort of heading. And then really, I think an understanding of the bigger vision, of the bigger picture, and so where we fit into a bigger program. But of these expectations, these sort of hopes, as we try and build a successful partnership, there's really one overarching principle, and that's around trust, and trying to build trust. And I think trust doesn't just come from the product that you manage to create together. Trust also comes from how you communicate. It comes from what you communicate. You build confidence as partners as you sort of improve this journey together. And these other elements are just as important as the final product that you produce. So for us as we sort of build partnerships in any project, there are a number of sort of touch points. So that might be sort of signing off wireframes or designs, or you might be sort of making amendments to functionality. And so during all these touch points where the agency and the client are having sort of dialogue, this is introducing risk into the project, as we have sort of risk about the success of those interactions. And they can often actually cause delay and sometimes stop production because there's not clear sort of channels of expectation, understanding of what needs to be communicated. Now, a successful partnership will address these by reducing the friction between these conversations, these sort of communication points, by clearly communicating what's expected from each sort of partner and what we expect going forward. So this is a game that I often like to sort of play when I'm sort of thinking about the a project, I like to try and put myself in the shoes of the client. So I ask myself, if I were the client, how would I respond to this request or this, sort of feature? So if I were to turn to you, B as the client, so if you were to come to me with the sort of first request.
So Sean, your initial estimate is too high. Our budgets can't accommodate that.
Okay, so as an agency, this is often something that we face at the estimate might be too high, and so we've got a choice in how to respond. So let's say we look at sort of stripping contingency out of the project. We look at sort of savings that we might be able to make, different approaches, and we manage to make a 15% saving in the cost. So for us as the agency, we've agreed to this. We've got our 15% reduction, and we're absolutely delighted. So this is to build trust between the client. Is that right?
No.
Okay, so actually we failed to build trust with the client here. Now the reason being is because the client's now suspicious about where this 15% saving has come from. Are they compromising on the quality of the product? Are we cutting corners to achieve this? And so it's really beginning to introduce question marks and sort of questions into the mind of the client. Let's take another example.
So Sean, we have some really challenging deadlines. We need that piece of development turned around in 2 days.
Wow, 2 days. Okay, so again, the client presents us with a real challenge. And so what do we do as an agency? Well, we pull out all the stops, we think about how can we do this, how can we please our client and give them what they want. So yet again, we managed to do it, and we agree to your terms. So surely this time we're building trust, so we're helping you and you're beginning to trust us. Is that right?
No.
So again, we've fallen foul. Now the problem here is that there's suspicion on the part of the client now, because what they've done is knowingly introduce us with near impossible deadlines. And so we've agreed to those deadlines. And so the client, we don't know the story for the client behind those impossible deadlines. So this might have sat on sort of Mike in marketing's desk for 4 weeks, and he was the final sign-off, and that hadn't happened. And so they're expecting to have a dialogue with us, expecting pushback, and then we would negotiate and we would find a common ground and where we could achieve this. But we haven't. We've just agreed, and now we've sort of instilling questions again and suspicions within the client because they're not sure we're taking these deadlines seriously. So let's have a final go.
So Sean, we have multiple functional requirements. We really want to, enrich the experience for audience, and I'd like you to implement X and Y and Z.
Okay. It feels like we've actually had that conversation, to be honest. Okay. Right, so, funny enough, I'm going to agree to this. So it sounds like B wants lots and lots of different features, lots of different things. And obviously I'm sort of, I want to please the client, I want to give them what they're asking for. So I'm going to agree. So surely this time, finally, we're building trust.
No.
See, we missed the mark again. And unfortunately, it's because, again, we don't know the narrative within the client. So what we might be seeing is, a questionnaire might have gone out into the organisation. So we might have sort of Sally from sales and Mike from marketing might have put in all these features, these requests, and then they've just presented them to us as a whole, to the agency. And then it was about sort of, creating a dialogue and distilling what we could do and what we couldn't. So what we're failing to do here is to provide any consultancy to talk about the value of these different features, which features we would recommend, which we would park or sort of push to another quarter. And so just by agreeing, we're failing to build that trust. We're failing to build that relationship together. So let's look at some things that do build trust and help us to build trust. So the first is understanding needs. That's us as the agency partner, understanding the needs of our client. The second is transparency. So, and I think B, you sort of mentioned this, but about honesty, about that transparency between both partners. The third is the approach. So how we approach this project and how we approach this way of working. Fourth is constantly improving. So even when our relationship is going very well and the project is going very well, it's about having that desire to keep looking and investigating and seeing opportunities to improve and build on what we already have. And then finally, a shared vision. So it's about us understanding where this project fits in and sort of where we're going. So B, if you'd just like to talk about Sage, the sort of Sage projects and Sage sort of specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sage Advice, what is Sage Advice? Well, it's our new blog for Sage. If you go to sage.com/blog, you can have a look. It went live in the US 2 months ago and has just gone live for the UK. And by the end of 2018, it will be live in 8 markets globally. So a very challenging project for us to make sure that Sage Advice works in multiple countries, multiple languages, and different cultural contexts as well. But Sage Advice is so much more than a blog. We wanted to build a rich content hub that would provide the answers and the advice to solve the problems that our target audiences are having every day. So Sage Advice is not about Sage, it's about those questions that our audiences have and us providing the answers, because we know about whether you're starting a business or growing a business or just running a business, you always have questions, you always need that advice. And there's so much information out there on the web, but we hope that with Sage Advice, what we actually provide is wisdom. And so ultimately, the vision for Sage Advice is that it grows Sage to become synonymous with the best business advice globally. And when I was saying that, Sage Advice is actually not about us, but about the questions that our audience had, it was really important for us to build this audience focus element into Sage Advice. And that's why when you visit the site, you get this kind of personalization opportunity. So you get to choose which type of content you want to see depending on what size your business is. And so that we're serving up the right content to the right people at the right time. Another thing about Sage Advice is only useful if you can trust it. And we feel that in Sage we're in a good position. We've been in business for 30 years and we have a big network of partners and accountants to have a ton of expertise. But it's really important that when people come to read Sage Advice, that they really understand that context and that expertise that's behind the advice. And that's why, as well as it being, user-focused and reader-focused, that it's also very focused on the contributors and the authors who are delivering that content for us. So we have multiple people writing for Sage Advice, both within the business and actually outside of the business. And so we have this featured author elements up on the site that really puts those people front and centre. You can actually learn more about them and the expertise that they have as well, so you can actually trust the advice that you're receiving. Another element that we have that we really liked is to kind of balance the whole search thing, because we put a lot of effort into search and making sure that when people are Googling questions around business, that Sage Advice is coming up. But we also recognise that sometimes people aren't even sure of maybe the specific questions that they have, but they want to make sure that they're keeping up to date with the questions and the conversations that are happening out there in business right now. And that's why this trending engine feature on the site, if you go to Sage Advice, you can see what posts are trending right now, what's popular right now, what are people talking about right now that I need to keep up on. And so that was a really important feature on Sage Advice for us as well. So how did we get here? Well, the initial journey to Sage Advice was a very quick 6-week turnaround to MVP. But before that, and the wider context is a lot of work being done in Sage, or a lot of stakeholder management to bring all of these multiple different stakeholders and multiple markets together to allow us to deliver something that would work for our global audience. And also it was happening in the context of a wider digital transformation. So Sage aren't just building a new blog, we're building an entire new website, moving each individual market site from individual country domains onto sage.com. The website's being built in a different CMS, it's not being built on WordPress where Sage Advice is. So there's this massive context and journey that we've gone on that Sage Advice had to fit into.
So let's have a look at those principles again, and thank you, and some of those challenges that we face and how we use these principles of building partnership when we were facing those challenges. So understanding the need. So right at the beginning of the project, when we were faced with this 6-week MVP build project, we also had the migration challenge. We had to look at the integration between .NET and WordPress, and we'll come on to some of those other challenges in a moment. But the very first thing that we needed to do was to define the problem. So when you receive a brief from a client, the brief will sort of communicate the problem on the client's terms. So the problems as they understand them. But as an agency, you then need to take that brief and start understanding and defining the problem on your terms. And invariably those terms will be more technical. You'll also be sort of taking a wish list and start looking at translating that into deliverables, so a deliverable program of work. And so in this instance, it led to a discovery sort of week. So we spoke to a dozen or so different departments, stakeholders within Sage, and we talked about their definition of success, about what they wanted within the program, but also what success would mean to them. So we spoke to the sort of, the marketing team and the technical team and the content team. And what became clear is that each of these had a different definition of success. So for the content team, it was the back end of the site. So they would be working every day on a daily basis with the back of the site. For the technical team, their definition was around performance and around security, and that's how they would define the success of the project. And then with the marketing team, it was about levels of engagement, about the user experience, about the aesthetics. That was their definition of success. So as the agency partner, we had to sort of take these definitions and really start sort of juggling these balls and trying to pull together these different definitions of success to build a program of work which would allow us to deliver all of these different definitions of success. The next principle we talked about was transparency. And this is particularly important when things aren't necessarily going well. So, in every project you hit challenges or things that hadn't been anticipated, and really that's when a successful partnership can come into its own, because you can work on this together, you can face this together. So, that might be a huge change sort of late in the day to your architecture. It might be a whole new requirement or a new sort of piece of work. And in fact, on this project, I mean, those very things happen. We had a late change to the API architecture that we had to push into the live site. We had to create a data layer, a custom data layer, and then we were looking at a sort of agile CRO process that we had to run alongside our other sort of work streams. So these were all challenges that, because we faced them together, we were able to successfully overcome. The next is approach. So I often like to think about approach as a sort of focus, almost like a sort of photographic lens. So you really have sort of two approaches. You have a single focus lens where you're just sort of zoomed in and you're looking at these various challenges. Or you can have a zoom lens, and that zoom lens allows you to sort of zoom out, to look at the bigger picture, to look at the challenges, and then zoom back in at the specific sort of challenges, the specific things you're trying to sort of tackle. Now, that single lens approach, where you're zoomed in and you're sort of facing, it's almost like you tend to have a sort of checklist, and then you hunker down and you just start hitting all of these different elements of the checklist. You're really not focused on the future, you're just sort of focused on the here and now. And often complexity will just sort of reveal itself partway on that journey. You don't really have any sort of foresight into it. And often you'll find that this approach forms a pattern. And so you'll often get very heavy comms at the beginning of the project, and so that might be sort of wireframes and designs. And particularly if you're working to BDUF, which is big design up front, you'll have a lot of comms, and then as soon as you get design sign-off, it stops, and you get radio silence. And your devs might be beavering away, working really hard, creating these designs and converting them into a site. But you're not really talking. I mean, there might be the odd murmuring and reassuring word, but there's no program of communication. And then right at the end, we have this huge moment of risk where you're presenting the design to the client, you're hoping for that wow moment where the client is delighted with what you've delivered. Equally, and every chance that you'll have a whoa moment where they just panic, and then panic ensues into the project. But what you can see is that trust is dipping through all of this. Why? Well, because we're not communicating. So there's another approach, and this approach, and many in the room will probably recognize this as an agile approach, that we're communicating. So we're communicating through the project, and actually our processes are ensuring that we're communicating. And so what's happening is that the trust is building as our communication and our understanding is building. But equally as important is that this approach, as we sort of zoom out and we can see the bigger picture, this enables us to recognize where the real challenges are in the project. And you should always front load the challenges, so always try and do the hard stuff first. And if you do that, you can start spreading the risk over your project. So you're sort of mitigating risk by spreading it across the project and not building up to that terrible sort of singularity where you're just revealing the design to the client and hoping for the best. Constantly improving is really important. I think this is more about attitude as both the agency partner and as the client, that we're not resting on our laurels, even though it's hugely successful. We always want to look at ways that we can improve, and that's not just the product, that's also our processes, so how we're achieving these things, how we're working together. And so recently we've been looking at some of our ceremonies, and particularly around the sort of sprint review, where at the end of every 2 weeks we talk to the client about what we've achieved and what we're sort of looking to do in the next sprint. And often this might be the only time that we get to speak to some of the key stakeholders, the key decision makers. So we've looked at improving this meeting, so sort of bringing decisions to the top of the meeting, so we clearly sort of define what decisions we're expecting or hoping from each stakeholder. Also looking at video, so I think Sage is now up to 13,000 employees, and there might only be half a dozen people in that meeting. So if we can create a small video, if we can create some easily digestible documentation, well then we can reach so many more people about the successes that we're achieving together. And then finally it's that shared vision, and it's really sort of understanding where your piece of the puzzle fits in. So you might be building a website, as we are in this instance, but there's much more going on within Sage, and there's much bigger picture, and so it's about understanding where this fits into the greater sort of Sage vision. And by taking that time to understand that, you can then start sort of fleshing out a roadmap, so sort of looking to where the project might be taking you. So you can start mapping out your phases and where you want to sort of entering into feature rich, and then the opportunities that are presented to allow you to sort of leapfrog over competitors and start innovating into new space. And it also, so this is a planning meeting that we had together in the Shard last month over in London, and it really allows you to start mapping out. So what you'll see on the table there is lots of different tickets, lots of different challenges. And as working in partnership, we can start mapping these out, and we can start sort of impact mapping them. So we know the business goals, we know what Sage are trying to achieve, so we can start mapping the value of these different challenges to those business goals and to the overall vision. So this is our physical board, this is the Scrum board that we work from. So when we're talking about sort of zooming in and out, I mean, we can zoom into, some of these are just a couple of hours, some of these tasks. And then we can zoom out, so this is the sprint, this is a 2-week period, and then we've got a sort of digital board where we can zoom right out. So let's zoom in, let's zoom into sort of 2 or 3 challenges that we face in this project and have a look at our approach. So the first was integrating. So as B mentioned, there was Sage.com, it was built on .NET. and obviously WordPress on PHP. And the request was made to sort of, create a seamless integration. Now, obviously, you can't sort of mash these data sets together or these databases together. So we had to think about an approach. And the key to our approach was defining success. So defining the problem and then defining success. What were they trying to achieve? And so it became clear that actually what Sage wanted was to surface relevant information, relevant articles on the .com site. So they wanted to be able to pull content from Sage and put it on the .com site. So obviously the API is our friend there. We can use an API link, we can have a little, like a keyword that you put in, and we can surface relevant information, which is exactly what we did. But actually we went further than that. And we went further than that because we knew about the importance and about sort of building partnership and the strength of that partnership. So we wanted to go much further, and actually we created a sort of custom relevancy engine at the end of this API endpoint. So you can just put one word in here and it will work, or you can put a multitude of filters in, and you can really start sort of turning up and turning down the dials of the relevancy. The technical thing isn't important. The important thing here is that we knew this was something that we were going to develop into, and so as a partner we decided to push forward and push into this development, knowing that Sage Advice will grow into this feature set. And so this is the custom weighting engine. So there's a lovely, I don't expect anyone to read this code, but it's a lovely logic to it where we're just sort of, almost like a league table, we're sort of allocating 5 points for a sort of category match, and then a point each if you match a tag, and a couple of points if you match a persona, and so on and so forth. And then creating this league table of the relevancy of each post, and then returning those results. So what we're doing is we know that we're going to require this greater relevancy, and so this allows us to grow into this function. But equally, it also allows us to create this seamless user experience as a user is sort of moving from .NET and moving to WordPress and then moving back out. They have no idea this is a frictionless experience. Because we've thought about the problem and understood what success meant, we can actually tackle it from a user perspective. So going back to our board, let's have a look at another challenge. So this was the migration. So this was thousands of posts scattered across dozens of existing blogs. Some were WordPress, some were Sitecore, some were unknown what the content management system was. We were told we wouldn't get access to all of them. This stuff keeps me awake at night. So we had this 6-week MVP build sort of over here, and then this huge undefined wobbly migration over here that we had to somehow solve. So how did we approach it? Well, we approached it in exactly the same way, that we needed to define what migration meant for Sage. So we asked the question, what does it mean? So it was moving thousands of posts from one place to another. And so we asked the question, well, why? What are you trying to achieve? And it was about not releasing the new Sage Advice website with zero content. So they wanted to ensure that some of the valuable content that had already been created was brought into the new Sage Advice. So then we had to define, well, what is content? What is content for Sage Advice? And it turns out it wasn't users, and it wasn't pages or taxonomies or anything that was really in the data set. It was just posts. So we carried on digging and said, well, what is a post for Sage Advice? What does a post mean? And so the answer came back around, it's a title, it's the content area, it's the author, it's the featured image. And so what became clear was that all of this information was already available on the internet. All of these posts existed in these blogs that already existed. So rather than having this huge migration program where we had to sort of try and mash these different data sets together, we could approach it from exactly the opposite point of view. Rather than coming from the back, we could approach it from the front, pull this content out of the existing blogs, and then deposit it into our new Sage Advice blog. And that's exactly what we did. So we created, over a week or two, we created this new sort of custom content scraper that mapped to the content we needed. We would feed this beast thousands of posts, so thousands of URLs, and then just on a recursive cron job, it would just run in the background, and it would just be dropping this content into the Sage Advice sort of website. So just by defining the challenge, defining success, we were able to approach the problem in an entirely and completely different way. And then the final challenge that we'd just like to talk about is, well, in fact, B, I'll let you sort of talk about this. So this is around sort of Slack integration and social.
Yeah, so for us, this was a really nice feature that we had as a requirement. So anybody that runs a blog will know that social media is a really important way to get readers to your site. So you have your traditional social channels like Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, but there's another side to social that's actually really important for bringing traffic to your blog, and that's dark social. And by dark social, we mean channels like Facebook Messenger, Skype Messenger, WhatsApp and Slack as well. And we did some analytics work on previous blogs in Sage and saw that dark social was actually responsible for bringing about 10% of traffic to our blog. And that's very important in the context of B2B blogs, and especially around our more enterprise content, where you might have a CFO who finds what he judges to be a really useful, helpful article on our blog. But maybe he's not the type of person who's going to share it out on Twitter, but he's absolutely the type of person that's going to send it to his team in maybe a Skype message or a Slack message. So, and that's dark, you know, that's not shared out, everybody can't see it, but it's still really important for bringing traffic to the site and for allowing people to share the content in the way that they want to share it. And so we had a requirement to essentially have these dark social sharing functionality enabled for every blog post.
Yeah, so Slack was an interesting one because there was, or there is in fact, a pre-existing sort of a tool where you can, the API with Slack, you can connect into WordPress. However, it's got a dependency on a third-party script which exists on a server somewhere, and so if anything happened to that server, every single implementation of that button globally would sort of disappear. So again, we could have used that, but in the interest of partnership and because we're invested in the project, we decided to create a custom tool. So that's exactly what we did. We created a plugin that had no third-party dependencies, so it was entirely self-contained, now integrates with the Slack system, and we're then pushing this into an alpha phase and back to the WordPress community so others can make use of this tool. So, returning to the question that we asked really right at the beginning of the talk, which was why? Why take the investment of the energy to build partnerships and attempt to build partnerships? And one of the key reasons is that it builds trust, and it's really enjoyable to work in a successful partnership. And also when I think about the value of partnerships, and I think about my relationship with WordPress, because I think WordPress has the opportunity to really be at the center of this. So when I think of WordPress, I think about its clean architecture, the fact that it's robust, that it's flexible, that I can iterate very quickly. And then I also think that I can trust it, and I've trusted WordPress for many, many years. And so the more I think about it, the more I think about WordPress in very much the same way as we've been discussing partnership today. And I can't think of any better software than WordPress to really be the foundation of building a successful partnership. Thank you.